This team will be scrutinized, celebrated for as long as the game is played.
In pro football, nobody's entitled to anything. You have to go out there and earn it.
I was pretty intent on proving myself.
We were going to determine the future of football in New England.
The Patriots are Super Bowl champions!
First dynasty of the century.
This game is like a narcotic. You're chasing that forever.
Breaking news right now.
Spygate, Deflategate.
Aaron couldn't separate himself from that dark side.
That team won enough to become the villain.
We worked for Bill, but we played for Tom.
Bill tore Brady's head completely off.
There's things that are done that can't be undone.
I was just trying to hold it together the best I could.
This team will be scrutinized, celebrated for as long as the game of football is played.
That was the trailer for the docu-series The Dynasty, New England Patriots, now streaming on Apple TV+. And this is Factual America. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. Each week I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. The Dynasty, New England Patriots, goes inside the NFL franchise's 20-year journey, from the unique chemistry that fueled 6 Super Bowl wins to the internal strife that sparked a turf war. Through never-before-seen footage and intimate interviews with Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, Robert Kraft, former players, and those who worked behind the scenes, director Matt Hamachek seeks to answer the question, what is the key to greatness? Listen as we learn the answer, as well as discuss the many highs as well as lows that are encountered on the road to success, on and off the field. Stay tuned. Matt Hamachek, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you?
Well, they're great. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And to remind our listeners and viewers, we are talking about The Dynasty, New England Patriots. Episodes 1 through 8 have released over the past month, basically since mid-February. And episodes 9 and 10 are releasing on March 15th. I think this on Apple TV+, I should add. And we will probably be releasing this podcast about that time or a little bit afterwards. So if you haven't had a chance to check out all 10 episodes, please do. So Matt, great to have you on. Finally to get you on. I know we had some scheduling issues certainly on our end, but it's a joy to have you on to the podcast. Now, this is one of those Dynasty, New England Patriots, but we always start the show with asking the guest, usually it's a director, what is the Dynasty, New England Patriots all about? Now, you could say, well, how long do you have? But maybe give us a synopsis, and then we'll dive in from there.
I think that, obviously, on its face, it's a documentary about a football team that had immense success in the NFL in America. I think the series that I and my team wanted to make was focused on a singular question that I sort of came to when I was interviewing one of the main characters in it, this guy named Ernie Adams, who's had a title, the Director of Football Research. And
I love that guy.
He's great. And I'm interviewing him for the first time. I think it was an audio-only interview. It was a getting-to-know-you interview in a way. And I wanted to see, because Ernie is a character who had never been really on camera before. He'd been, within New England and within football, the football world in America, he's a somewhat mysterious figure that nobody ever really got to see or talk to before. So I wanted to see, how does this guy talk? Can he tell a story? And he could immediately, I could tell that. But then he said to me, every team in the NFL starts the season and says that they want to go to the Super Bowl, but not every team is willing to do what it takes to get there. And so that question of what does it take to get there? What does it take to accomplish greatness was the question that I was answering. But I think that I didn't have any interest in doing it in an academic way, in the sense that I didn't want to take this sort of 30,000 foot view of, okay, looking back on this now, why do you guys think that you got to the greatness that you did, or what was the secret sauce? I didn't really approach it that way. What I tried to do is make it as if you were in the room or on the field with these people while they were going through all these events, and to focus on a story that was much more about human beings and how they interacted with each other than about football.
And so mindful of that, you're able to do that because you have access to some never before seen footage is one. I mean, the usual never before seen stuff, but right. But I mean, what was going on? The Crafts and the family, were they always filming behind the scenes? Because it seems to be from the very beginning.
Yeah, the Crafts obviously themselves were not filming.
They themselves.
Exactly. No, I know. I'm joking. Yeah. They had the team had a production company that basically, especially as they started to win Super Bowls, it became evident to them that there was some form of history going on here, and it was worth documenting. And I think in an interesting way, they were pioneers when it came to just filming constantly. And so we ended up having access to 35,000 hours of footage, and to give you a visualization for that, it's these 16-wheeler Mack trucks. If you took all of the tapes, you'd have to fill up 2 of those in order to sort of get through the amount of tapes that we looked through just from them, plus the stuff from our NFL films and just your other sources, all the sports shows and things like that. So the process of going through all of that was 6-7 months. Sometimes people were triple speeding through the things because they knew that there was nothing there. And then every once in a while you get these gems of, the thing that the listeners have to understand, if they're not fans of the NFL, is that the Patriots, if they have been anything from the outside looking in, is a team that keeps everybody at arm's length, right? They were very secretive. They were very, you really didn't get a lot of emotion or insight or anything into what was going on behind those walls. One of the journalists that we interviewed, along with the 70 plus players and coaches, execs that we had access to, he sort of described it as they never invited you into the party because there was no party. And so this footage, along with being able to talk to all these people for the first time, it felt like we were getting to sort of peer behind the walls for the first time ever of this organization that obviously had an incredible amount of success, but also scandal and heartbreak and obviously, this whole thing came crumbling down at the end. Right.
Yeah, and the timing's actually quite impeccable too, with the head coach Bill Belichick now leaving the organization. Obviously, a few years after Tom Brady has. I think. And that's an interesting point because besides this footage that these 2 Mack trucks worth of footage that you and all your associates had to go through, you've got a lot of these guys don't give the impression that they weren't there was no party. I mean, you've got a pretty animated bunch of people outside of the main characters, obviously.
No, I think that's right, though. I think, that was the perception from the outside looking in. And not only are these some of the best storytellers that I've ever encountered in documentary film, but also they're lively. And then as we got to look into this archive, some of the times when you would expect them to be the most down and, like when they were accused of filming their opponent's sidelines in 2007, I think that put their backs up against the wall, and they had, and that locker room was having more fun that season. And I sort of have described it at times almost like you're on the Death Star with Evil Empire, but it's a party, and they're having a blast as they're going from planet to planet, destroying everybody in their path.
Right.
So that's the great thing about making documentaries is sometimes, especially with a subject matter that people believe they have consumed, to a great degree, you get to sort of play with what people expect the story to be and turn it on its head. And I think finding footage that makes people more three-dimensional and shows you a different side of them is always obviously the part of what makes being a filmmaker so much fun.
I mean, and indeed, so with that, following on from that, knowing what you know now, I mean, what has surprised you most, or what did you not know going in that you do know now?
I think that the thing you have to understand is I didn't grow up a fan of this team, and so.
Were you a fan of the NFL at least?
I was definitely a fan of the NFL. My team is the Green Bay Packers.
But you've beaten the Patriots. But that was in a Super Bowl.
That's true.
Back.
That was a very, very long time ago.
Exactly.
So the truth is, I think everything about this story surprised me because I had heard, like casual fans, you hear about the cheating scandals, you hear about you sort of get the caricature of what these people are supposed to be, and then as you dig deep and deeper and deeper, you realize that behind all the headlines, there's just so much more, and these people are so complex and nuanced. And then I think the other thing that really surprised me was how this thing came to an end. Because it's this incredible story, really, of a group of people doing the thing that most of the time never happens, which is they put aside their egos, they do what's best for this larger goal, and they create this very selfless machine, basically, and they win 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, and then they sustain it through multiple cheating scandals. They win 3 more Super Bowls, and then all of these principles that were sort of the foundation for this perfect machine start to fall apart, and ego and just being selfish in various ways, or going against what the sort of stated rules were of being a patriot, and all these things all start to make their way into the building, and this thing starts to fall apart at the end.
So that takes us very conveniently. This is really what the last 2 episodes are about, which are going to be releasing in a couple days, and and we can talk about all that other stuff and Deflategate and everything. But I know I have no problem telling people that I know you've been interviewed quite a bit on shows that have got bigger audiences than we do, I'm sure, and talking about a lot of these things in detail. But since these are releasing now, episodes 9 and 10, I mean, that decline and fall of the Dynasty, I mean, that was, again, we all hear the rumors. I mean, I live here in the UK, but it's a lot of NFL fans here, and I follow US sports. But the thing that struck me was this, how dire the 2017 season? 2017
season was
just absolutely horrific. Everyone says that you interviewed were saying it's like the worst season they ever in that period.
Yeah, so I think what had happened, I think, to go back and understand how things got to this way, and again, this is all sort of through the lens of this very human drama that involves things that we've all experienced at different times in our lives. To me, it really starts in the 2008 season. Tom Brady has the whole team has gotten over one of the worst losses that you could possibly imagine. They had gone undefeated up until they get to the Super Bowl. They lose in spectacular fashion to the Giants. And then basically one of the first few plays of the next season, Tom Brady goes down with a knee injury, and he is forced to leave the team and sort of rehab his injury elsewhere in California for the entire season. And he is sort of faced for the first time in his career with his football mortality, the fact that this will come to an end some point in time. And if it had been maybe a little bit worse, maybe it would have happened sooner than it would have happened that year. And who knows what it's going to be like when he comes back, because this is an injury that has ended careers or made players much worse than they were before. So while he's confronting that, his head coach, Bill Belichick, is proving to the world that he can basically do anything. And without somebody like Tom Brady, he's going 11-5, which is a great record. And he's doing it with a backup quarterback that hasn't started a game since the 7th grade.
Exactly. How do they not make the playoffs at 11-5? I didn't have a chance to look at all the records of the other teams.
Tiebreakers within the division, basically.
Right.
The Jets, I think, had the tiebreaker that year.
Yeah.
But that starts the tension, right? Tom Brady is out there saying, I'm going to play until I'm 45 years old, because he starts to say things like, how do I not break? How do I not find myself on the operating room table again?
Right.
And Belichick, rightfully so, is saying, I've got all this data that says that when quarterbacks get to the end of their 30s, they basically start to fall off of a cliff. And that isn't that far away for somebody like Tom Brady. And so that starts out the initial tension. And then I think what I would say is to fast forward to what we cover in episode 8, which is essentially, the drafting of Tom's replacement. basically Bill is sort of saying, there's a famous press conference where he says, we all know Tom's age and contract situation. And that's a pretty clear indication of where his mindset is, because the question to him is, have you drafted his backup just to have a backup in place, or are you drafting his successor? And when he says, well, we all know what Tom's age and contract situation is, that sort of indicates what his mindset is. And then we go back in time, and that's one of the devices that we use from a storytelling perspective, is we wanted to have an A story that sort of started right when Tom comes in and ends pretty much right when Tom leaves, but to use flashbacks to sort of elucidate what's happening in the A story. And we go back in time at this point to Tom's time at Michigan, where he comes in, he's the 7th string quarterback, which is one of those situations where it's like, is this guy ever going to play? Right. And over that's from freshman year to his 5th year, senior year, he eventually makes it into be the starting quarterback, but the coach has also brought in this young hotshot, Drew Henson, who Tom admits is better arm, is faster and more elusive and all of these things. And so Tom will start the games, and then all of a sudden Drew Henson will be put in. And it's an interesting thing because, Tom would have a lead, and then oftentimes Drew would come in and the lead would be dwindled, and then Tom would have to be put in to sort of rectify the situation. So he leaves college, and then finally he gets to the NFL, and he's the 199th pick. So for Tom, and for your viewers that don't know, the 199th pick is one of the last people to get chosen. And I think that in Tom's mind and his family's mind and the players who are friends with Tom's mind, they all sort of see Tom as the guy who has never been picked, the guy who is never chosen, who's never been given his due, no matter what his accomplishments are. And just when he starts to obtain that, his coach is ready to start moving on from him. And that sets up basically a Super Bowl against the Atlanta Falcons. And Tom goes down 28-3, and he throws a pick six, which is, he throws the ball, it's intercepted by the defense in return for a touchdown. And he says, if we lose this game, I know what everybody's going to say, which is that I'm washed up. And the Boston Globe at the time is covering that Super Bowl, and they have to run a very early edition of the paper that goes to the snowbirds down in Florida who once lived in New England. And it says a bitter end. And then Tom gets up and launches the greatest comeback in sort of NFL history, if not sports history. And I think a lot of people we talked to said that was sort of a turning point in his identity and how he saw himself. And it was this guy who had always been willing to be a punching bag, had always, Belichick would come in and say these things in these team meetings about him and say, I can get the kid from, Foxborough High School to throw a better ball than this. And Tom was a willing participant because I think he knew that the culture that it created by doing that was one where you could be a 20-year-old rookie who comes in, you have this great signing bonus, you think you're hot stuff, but the coach is yelling at this guy who's won multiple Super Bowls. And so it sets the culture, right? Nobody's above the team. And he kept subjugating his ego over and over and over again. But then finally, at what point do you just say, okay, I've won more Super Bowls than anybody else has. I may actually be the greatest of all time. And I don't think that necessarily Tom ever had that exact thought, but I do think that from the people we talked to, he changed, and as one person puts it, wasn't as worried about what Belichick, his coach, thought of him anymore, and was going to start doing a little bit more of his own thing. And I think that sets us on this path, towards a team-wide disillusionment. And when that really sort of the tension between the two of them for that 2017 year, which is what we started talking about here, they felt, one player describes it almost as like two parents arguing all the time, and that there was all this tension. And I think the key to that year was there was other things going on within the team, and then they lost. And I think in sports, for a team that is as driven as the Patriots are, that is willing to sacrifice as much as they're willing to sacrifice for the betterment of the team, there is a winning cures everything element to all the tension that had been building up over the years. When they won, it didn't matter, but then when they lost, finally, one of the players, he said he felt like he had been cheated by the team, by the coach, for not getting an explanation for a decision he had made. And I think that was sort of really the beginning of the end of this whole thing.
But it's still, I mean, there's so many things remarkable about all this story, because, you know, a lot of teams go through that and they don't even make the playoffs, right? And these guys are still making the Super Bowl, and they have this tension, and they still win another Super Bowl, at least one. I'm losing track, but it's certainly
yes, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah, after that season, they still win another one. So, you know, it's you know, it is absolutely amazing. And I mean, it's almost at times, and it's not even this is not at poking, you know, pointing at Belichick or anything, because I think they all buy into it. It's a very ruthless, or was a very ruthless organization, wasn't it? I mean, you know, guys come and go. It's not like, you know, you have a core group, certainly. And I guess you had two core groups, the first set, you know, the first set of Super Bowls and the second set of Super Bowls they won. But guys are going, and guys didn't even come back. I mean, you know,
but I think that's part of the ruthlessness, as you put it, which I think is fair, is the reason that they won so much, right? And Belichick's ruthlessness and his willingness to move on from players 1 year early rather than 1 year late, to be one of the first coaches that really understood the value of the cap, and meaning the salary cap and how much money a team can spend, things like that. But it created this environment where it was a win at all cost kind of. We're all going to collectively push ourselves harder than we've ever been pushed, because there's this thing out there that we want to accomplish. And I think what happened is everybody bought in and everybody went through it. And I think that, yes, you're right. There's a lot of teams that say, it's sort of like what Ernie Adams says. There's a lot of teams that say they want to do it, and then they fizzle out. Either they don't even make it to the playoffs, or they do and they lose out in the first round. But this team always gave everything. And I think once they finally, you know, had all of this new tension that entered into the situation, and then they got to the Super Bowl and they didn't win, I think that was sort of the, you know,
the beginning of the end, or the next beginning of the end. You've already had a beginning of the end. But, and well, that's, I mean, and so you asked a question that you had a question you wanted to answer. Is that one of the, I mean, I imagine you have multiple answers to the question that you asked about how, what exactly, I'm not going to put it exactly the way you put it, but how do you
obtain greatness?
Obtain greatness. Is Ruth, and don't use my word necessarily, but ruthlessness.
No, I think it is.
Is that one way to greatness?
I think it's an important part of it. I think you have to be relentless and maniacal about your approach to greatness, right? And I think, look, I remember when I was interviewing Michael Strahan, who was one of their opponents that they played against, and he said something to me. He said, you know, we were talking about Christopher Nolan has made these movies, the Batman movies,
definitely,
and he had talked about this line from it, which is, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And I think what he's referencing football wise is that, there's a lot of teams out there that die the hero all the time, but the thing that made the Patriots great was they kept at it. And it was maniacal. There was something about the way that they went about it that was brutal and cold, but that's not to say that the people that were inside the organization were that way all the time. They had fun as they were doing it, but there was a level of intensity to it and a desire to dominate, you know, unlike many other, I can't think of a recent team in a professional sport, at least in the States that I can think of, that had that mentality for that long of a period of time. And I just think if you hadn't had Belichick and you hadn't had Brady, it never would have happened. It took total buy-in from both of them, and their partnership and willingness to sort of get people to drink the Kool-Aid and buy into this thing is sort of what made it all happen. And I think, you know, on one hand, you can say, well, that sounds pretty miserable, but I think what they would tell you is kind of, there is a famous quote from another head coach that said, "We play to win the game." And I think that the Patriots saw it that way. That's the point of all this. What's the point of showing up if you're not going to do everything to win?
Okay. Let's hold it right there. I think we're going to give our audience a quick break. So we'll be right back with Matt Hamachek, the director of the Dynasty New England Patriots. Episodes 1 to 10, by the time you see this podcast, are available on Apple TV+. You're listening to Factual America. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or X to keep up to date with new releases or upcoming shows. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program, our guests, and the team behind the production. Now back to Factual America. Welcome back to Factual America. I'm here with Matt Hamachek, the director of the Apple original docu-series, The Dynasty New England Patriots. Episodes 1 to 10 available now on Apple TV+. If you're watching this after March 15th, I think you will be, or listening to this. I don't think we're going to release before then. So we've obviously been talking about the film and this question you posed, and you've been trying to answer, or were trying to answer as you were creating the film. I mean, how did you become involved with this project?
Basically, when I was working on my last project, which was Tiger, it was about the golfer Tiger Woods.
Right.
The person who wrote that book that inspired that documentary series was writing this one. He asked me to come on, and right. I said, sure. Not really knowing, in the process of figuring out what that question is that you're trying to chase, and what a film is going to be about, is one that's constantly sort of evolving over time. And because I wasn't a fan, as I got to talk to these people, it was really about just listening and saying, okay, for the first time, all these people that were actually there in the rooms when this great success happened, but also when all of the other sort of side of the story happened, they're all together, they're talking. So let me just ask questions and to a degree get out of the way and let them tell the story as much as anything else.
Right. Okay. And so how do you go about making a compelling doc about a team that everyone hates? I mean, for those who are not that familiar, I think it's back, like you said, it's back to that Strahan quote from Batman, you die a hero, you live long enough, and you become the villain. And so certainly there's this, it's not just the Patriots too, it also corresponded with, I used to live in Boston, by the way, so okay. And so at the same time, you had the Red Sox enjoying success, the Celtics even win one championship in that time frame. So the Boston sports fan was getting a bad reputation nationally, I think, is fair to say.
For winning a little too much, basically.
For winning too much for their own good after all those years of suffering, except for the Celtics and the Bruins. Or does it make it easier to make that film?
I don't think it's easier or harder. I think that, first off, I didn't hate the Patriots, but I certainly knew, as a fan of another team who has had a decent amount of success, but not anything remotely as close to the Patriots, I knew that the only kind of film that I would want to watch is one that was as sort of unvarnished telling of the story, right? And so nobody needed to see more highlights of the Patriots sort of hoisting the Lombardi Trophy over their heads, and that has been done so well by the in-house production team at the Patriots, by NFL Films, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that when you ask yourself a question like, how do you obtain greatness, you have to have sort of a gimlet eyes kind of to say, okay, what is this really? This is not just and then there were some great plays drawn up, and in a way, honestly, like none of the things that I've ever worked on either as a director or as a producer, writer, and editor have ever been that way. And so whatever, even when I worked on Amanda Knox for Netflix,
great doc.
No, thank you. I think that we were trying to, yes, of course, the sort of the thing that was going to drive the plot along was obviously the story of a young woman who was over in Italy who had been falsely accused of murder, depending on who you ask. And but I think that examining things like the patriarchy and what we expect women, how women should behave and how promiscuous they should or shouldn't be, and things like that, and just sort of the idea of what the media wants and everything was much more interesting to me. With Tiger, it was the idea of this golfer who was almost like a blank canvas that everybody wanted to paint onto, whether it was his father's and his dreams that and then or white America or anything else. And so trying to figure out, I think the thing for me is always trying to figure out what that other question is, or what that larger theme is that you're trying to examine. And normally once you figure that out, I think the concern over the audience for something like this goes away, meaning you asked, how do you make something for people who hate the Patriots? I think that once you find a larger question like that, not only are you not worried about the people who hate the Patriots, you stop worrying about NFL fans in general, right?
Exactly.
Because you really find a universal story. And when you talk about all these details of, Tom's out and how does that make him, I think there's a lot of people that have related to the idea of their worth being overlooked as they get older, or feelings of betrayal, or, all these things that are very, very human. And I think that the fact that it happened within this sort of castle up on the hill, that you don't normally get to peer inside of, it made it feel, I've jokingly sort of called it like Shakespeare but with footballs. It has these, it is a very human story. And I think that because we were examining larger questions, it was for an audience that loves, hates, and could care less about football or the Patriots.
Well, and indeed, and I mean, a bit off subject, but the other thing the film does so well, the series, is it really frames America perfectly, in the 21st century, right? So the first Super Bowl is right after that season after 9/11, right? And then the end of the dynasty is basically about the time, around the time of the U.S. pullout. Well, it's a little bit before, but it's those first 2 decades of the 21st century are perfectly framed. And so just even though, and for those who are football fans, don't worry, it's focused on football, but at the same time, you can't help but all this stuff is,
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. But it's really important one thing that's really important for me is I greatly appreciate that you've picked up on that.
Yeah.
And that was not by accident, but one of the things that I always try to focus on is not doing that in an overt way, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, there is a way to make this film that is, every once in a while we find a way to like work in something that's happening within America, like the 2008 election or something like that. And how does that, or the Boston bomb, and how does this tie into what we're trying? And I always think that it's kind of you trust your audience, and if they pick up on these things, which I think you're entirely correct about, it's examination of, whether it's the male ego or a certain type of culture within America, a love of dominance, et cetera, like all these things. I think it's all there, but I always try to not say it outright, because I kind of feel that when you're making a fiction film, you wouldn't sort of have somebody lecturing the audience about these things. You just watch it and you'd see the characters and you'd come to these conclusions on your own. And so I really try to make docs that way as well. And that's something that even when I was not directing, but editing is something that I was always sort of push for as much as possible, is to keep that sort of larger context out of it as much as possible, because I think that's the kind of storytelling that I like.
No, and I think it's well, I'm glad I did pick up on the right thing, and I also, it's done very well, and I think even just, and partly it's because players get older, whatever, but even just sort of the locker room seems different towards the footage, and it's not quite necessarily as boisterous. And I know we're not going to go into details about like things like Aaron Hernandez and these things,
sure.
but we can, but we're not. It's but. There is even scenes there that are much more of another era seemingly now, even compared to where we are now. Not saying, and
even you see the 20 years unfold over time, and that not only happens. I mean, there's so many different ways that happens. Obviously, one is just it's as simple as the way the footage looks. It's as simple, also even generationally, the way that people change and their tolerance for certain things. I think there's all sorts of different conversations that you can have around what you see unfold over the course of this series, because I've often even asked myself, I wonder if the guys that were part of the first generation of the Patriots, they would be having the same conversations that the guys that are towards the end of it would be having.
Right.
And it's all part of it. And yeah.
And so, and one thing you've also got, obviously we've already talked about, all the old, I forget, you said something like at least 70, I think, players and different people that you had access to. But obviously, and that's really, like you said, it's I feel like I see some of these players in a way I hadn't thought of them before, in terms of very, very, very comfortable in terms of in front of the camera and relaying these stories. But then it gets to the big three. Obviously, it gets to Belichick and Brady and Robert Kraft. I mean, how did you go about trying to interview Bill Belichick? I mean, have you ever had a more hostile? I mean, I don't mean this, and I know you've had a little controversy, I think, about this, but have you had a more hostile witness, so to speak, in trying to interview someone? I mean, he's a man of few words if he wants to be.
No, I mean, look, I think anybody who's ever watched him up on the lectern after a game understands that over time he became, when he was in Cleveland, for example, when he was the first time he was a head coach, I think part of what we were trying to show is the evolution of him over the course of time. And one of the things that happened that we didn't go into in great detail, but we wanted to sort of document, was in Cleveland, he made this really tough call where he thought that this quarterback that they had was
Bernie Kosar, right?
Bernie Kosar was not sort of, he said it was the reason. He cuts him and he says the reason is because of his diminishing skills. And one of the things that was interesting about that was he was very honest with the press. He gave them the exact reason he did it. And I think he got his head bitten off for that. And then, he still tried, I think, at the beginning with the Patriots. But then once Spygate happened, I think there was a feeling of betrayal. And Scott Pioli, who is the vice president of player personnel, who's another one of our incredible interviews.
Indeed.
He says that Bill turned inward. And it was partly because there was sort of a hypocrisy within the league that everybody was coming after him for this thing that I think they all, and I think there's truth to it, that they felt like everybody else was really doing, but was it because, it wasn't just because the Patriots were the only ones doing it. It was a little bit was because they were winning too much. There was arrogance, there was hubris, there was all these things that other people didn't like. But I think a lot of it was the winning.
Yeah.
And so after that, Belichick turns inward. And what you notice in my interview with Bill is that there's a lot of things that Bill likes talking about, right? There's when it's Super Bowl wins, when it's obtaining great players. He has a great moment with Randy Moss, one of the greatest wide receivers in NFL history, where he calls Randy in a club and says, "You have to come." And Randy thinks that it's somebody impersonating Bill Belichick, and they
that's hilarious.
Retell the story. So like Bill, Bill's great, and he goes into detail, and he's laughing, and he's having a good time with that. He similarly does it when he's talking about Lawyer Malloy, a player, and when he's talking about Bill gives up his hotel room that night, the week before the Super Bowl, so that Lawyer can be more comfortable. And part of the reason we showed that was the idea. This was the concept of team first in its most pure form. Everybody was buying in. Everybody was doing everything that they could to make this thing happen. And then obviously when we talk about the subjects that Belichick is not as interested in talking about, like Spygate or sort of any of the times towards the end that were a little bit tougher, he doesn't want to talk about it. And I think that I looked at it two ways. One was I needed to ask Bill the same questions that I had basically asked everybody else that sat down in the chair across from me. And then the other part was I wanted to give him the opportunity to comment on the things that people were saying. And I knew, I had an idea that there were going to be subjects that he didn't want to talk to, but I thought both of those things, especially the ability to comment, was an important part of this. And
because he could have said no. He could have said, "I'm not participating in this."
Yeah, right? and the truth is, we talked about it. And I remember standing within the building, there's a department called football operations, and
Right.
it has it's sort of Bill's domain, or
Right.
was Bill's domain.
Right.
And in the lobby, he came and we had this conversation. I remember him asking me, how will I be portrayed in this thing? And I told him the same answer that I give everybody, which is you're going to be portrayed somewhere between the hit piece that your enemy would make about you and the puff piece that you would make about yourself. And in between,
that's a great way.
Normally lies the truth about all of us, right? We're not the saints
right.
that we would like ourselves to be,
Exactly.
and we're not the way our worst enemies see us. And so I think that with all of the characters in this is the way that they were portrayed. And, you know, I think that's sort of the right way to sort of always approach it. We're all messy, and none of us are perfect. And, you know, part of telling any story is sort of getting into all of it.
Yeah. And, you know, so there's obviously some no-go areas. You won't go on the record about, say, Malcolm Butler, that one player in the one Super Bowl that he didn't play. Or saying, you know, but he's not just the only one. I mean, Tom Brady similarly, he said out front, you know, says, no, I don't have anything else to say about it. Or there's certain things that I just will not want to share. How hard do you push on those? I mean,
Tom at first said no. And then sometimes, you know, what Tom says, what you're referring to, is I asked Tom about Deflategate, which is the scandal where he was accused of underinflating footballs to get a better grip, and it sort of consumed our nation. And I think the point in covering that one in particular was there was a farcical nature to
how we want to be so distracted away from the important things.
It's I mean, look, I mean, I'm sure you're
and Al Michaels
listeners, right?
Go ahead.
Well, your listeners right now are going through it with what's going on with Kate Middleton, right? It's a distraction.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's a distraction. And I think everybody's consumed by that right now, and ignoring incredibly important things that are going on in our world right now. And so, you know, that's the reason I wanted to cover that. But getting back to the interview, I asked Tom, would you like to comment? And he says no. And then one of the things that you interview people sort of in different ways depending on their personality, but oftentimes I pause afterwards because sometimes people fill in the silence, right? And in Tom's case, he did. He said, you know, it was something that it became something that was much more about underinflated footballs in the end. And sometimes you have to learn when to drop the rope and move on.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, you know, it's an interesting thing because you correctly pointed out that at first he says no, but it's interesting. A lot of people have just said that he says no, but he actually does go on to talk about it and sort of, and that was a moment. And I do that, you know, sometimes you pause and just let people fill in the air afterwards because, I feel like sometimes people have more that they actually want to say and then they don't. And so, and giving them room to comment is important. But also with Belichick, there were times when I would ask a question, he would say no. He never filled in the air, but I left that in at times because I wanted people to understand that there wasn't more on the cutting room floor, that he didn't then respond to the question the sort of the way that Tom does. And we show Tom doing that. And so a lot of it was just, you know, I think in an interesting way, all the coaches, all the people in the coaching staff, including Bill, were sort of asked the same questions, and all the players, a lot of them were asked the same questions and sort of treated the same way. And I don't want to make it sound cold, but you know, a lot of people have asked me this question of, what was it like to sit across from Tom, or what was it like to sit across from Bill? Not being a fan helped in that case because I know obviously they aren't the same as any other player or any other coaching person on the coaching staff, but to a degree, that's how we viewed it.
Yeah. And so since you've previous, I haven't had the pleasure of seeing it, but since you also did the Tiger doc, I mean, since we are talking about potentially, if I don't know if there's much debate, but two GOATs really, in their different. Is there something that, you know, in terms of this key to greatness? Is there something that you saw that's similar in both of them that drove them to achieve what they have achieved?
I think there's obviously a lot of things that that they don't have in common, right? Because Tiger obviously had immense issues within his personal life, and part of and his story is different in a lot of ways because of that. But I think the one key, it's a combination of two things. The first is, even from a young age, being just driven in a way that most people will never be. But then even when you obtain greatness multiple times over, finding something that motivates you to continue to do it, to get a little bit better, even when the difference between where you're at and where you're trying to get to is a fraction of a percentile, right? And so, in an interesting way, despite the fact that Belichick's sort of culture and, according to the people that we talked to, the way he treated Tom at times is part of what led to the end of Tom being on the team. I also think that it'd be foolish to ignore the fact that he was the perfect coach for Tom.
Right.
He was the guy who always kept the carrot just out of reach, right? And never gave him that approval for a guy that desperately, according to some people, were seeking it. I think that for a guy who had won 5 Super Bowls and then eventually won a 6th, and then went on to and then left and went to go on to win a 7th, having somebody like Belichick in his life who never gave him that thing that he apparently was craving was crucial to this all working. And I think similarly, I don't think there could have been a more perfect quarterback for Belichick than Tom Brady, because this is, in America, 91 out of the top 100 television events, give or take, every year are NFL events, right? And the quarterback is the position within the NFL. And Tom was not only the most accomplished quarterback of all time, he was also a global celebrity married to a supermodel.
Right.
And more oftentimes than not, that person, sort of rightfully so and understandably so, would become larger than just the position on a team and part of a cog in a wheel. But Tom's willingness to play that game and play that role for Belichick for all these years was if you had anybody else, I just don't think it would have ever worked. And that doesn't mean that it takes away from either of their accomplishments individually, and it doesn't. And I think more importantly for me, because I asked Scott Pioli this question in episode 10, say, who's responsible? Is it more Tom or more Bill? Because everybody is asking this question. And I think and I think Scott's answer is one of the best in the entire series. And he says it's disrespectful to every coach, every player who's come through this organization. And at the end of episode 10, there's this moment where Tom says, it's perfect. It doesn't need to be anything more than that, and I have been thinking about that as we were making it, as this thing has started to roll out, and I can't put into Tom's mouth what I think he was meaning by that, but I think that for me, I think in a way, it's, to me, what I take that as is that it's the great highs, it's the messiness, it's all of it. And it's all and that sort of cauldron of everything that made this team is perfect, and it doesn't need to be anything more than that. And I think that if the goal was to win and win at a level that has never been accomplished before and will never be accomplished again, they accomplished their goal. And they obtained as close to perfection as you can possibly get, despite all of the messiness.
I think, perfectly said. And I think also, if I recall correctly, it probably is in the last couple episodes, but at least one, if not a few others, and I think Robert Kraft's one of them, even says life is messy. Life, they say these things
as much as we want it. He says, life is sort of imperfect as much as we want it to be the opposite, or something to that effect.
Exactly.
And so that's an easy thing for a person who's that kind of perspective, which I think, one of the things we talked about earlier is that I never wanted to let perspective be part of, I didn't want to have that 30,000 foot view of the story and reflecting back. And I think in episode 10, for the last sort of 10 minutes of the episode, is where we finally allow that to come flooding in the door, right?
Yeah.
And so that's an easy thing for him to say, because he's 82 years old and or however, I think maybe 81 when he said it. But I think that what you get to witness with all of these characters, but in particular Tom, because when he starts the story, he's 20-something years old, and he's learning a lot of life lessons along the way. And then when we interviewed him, he was in the middle of not only his career ending, but also a divorce from his wife, which we don't get into. We don't really get into at all their personal lives in the story. But I think one of the reasons that viewers will be surprised when they watch Tom in this is that he was at a very interesting and sort of inflection point in his life, obviously, when he sat down to interview for this thing. And I think that made one of the reasons that I think his interview is so great is because he had a lot going on, and he was thinking about a lot of things, and it was taking him back to these moments that were sort of incredibly pivotal in his life.
Yeah.
And I think he was maybe at a place also where it was he could sort of take you back into the room and relive some of those moments.
It's very intimate. I mean, especially more than I was expecting, especially that when you get to some of the latter period.
Yeah.
So how does it? We don't have much time to get left, actually. But how does it feel like that? How does it feel that this is finally all coming to an end? You must feel like you've put the equivalent of 2 decades into this project.
Yeah. I think that I was very, very fortunate to work with an incredible team of people. And the reason I can say that is because, it took us 2.5 years more from start to finish to do the story. And that involved a lot of running all over the country to do these interviews. And then, just countless hours of dedication and sort of determination to get the thing to the place where we knew it had to get to. But the best feeling in the world is even when you look at the imperfections of the film and you know that they're there, you can have the confidence in saying, I know that there are reasons why we got there. And so to have that feeling and then sort of see it go out into the world and see all the reactions, it's kind of fantastic. And I'll put it this way, I'm very much looking forward to sort of spending some more time with my family and going on a vacation where we're about to go on spring break. And the last 2 times we went to the same place for spring break, I spent most of the time on Zoom calls with the team, talking about episode structure and story things and stuff like that. So I think everybody's looking forward. My family is looking forward to me actually getting to be on vacation for the first time for the spring break.
Well, yeah, I do hope you enjoy that. And speaking of teams, so you see how I've set this up. Lessons learned from following the Patriots, do you apply them to teams making documentary films? I mean, is it the same? Do you need these sometimes not greatest relationships? Sometimes the best creativity comes out of contentious relationships. What's your view?
No, I think the reason I was nodding my head at first is I have an editor on the project, Dan Koehler, who I've collaborated with on almost all of the last 10 years of projects I've worked on. And he is my closest collaborator and one of the most talented humans out there. And he's a great, great storyteller. And there's no way I would have been able to accomplish this, Tiger, or anything else without him.
Right.
And we always talk about how, both on Tiger and this, that I'll admit that there were definitely times where we said, "Oh man, some of the maniacal determination aspects of telling these stories about these people have creeped their way into our lives." And we normally said this when we were up at 4:00 in the morning, and sort of pushing and trying to get it to where it needed to go. But I think that the second part of what you said is right, which is that you need to surround yourself at all times with people who are willing to disagree with you and tell you no and why.
Yeah.
I don't think that needs to get as contentious as it got on the Patriots.
Right, exactly.
For it to succeed, I think you just need to have a healthy environment where people can tell you you're being an idiot and that they're right and you're wrong. And look, there were times, I've actually talked about this with Dan in the 10th episode. There was a time when I was convinced, and this sounds so silly, but I was convinced that we shouldn't leave in the middle of a Super Bowl and go back to a moment where we were examining how Bill Belichick came up with a scheme that he did by sort of going back into the building and doing a flashback in the middle of the Super Bowl, because I was convinced that the energy of being in the building and sort of seeing the footage and all this stuff was so important. And we got into a big battle about it basically. And he said, look, I'm right here. And finally I just said, okay, when Dan digs in this much, this is the time for me to sort of get my head out of my butt and sort of and go and ask a few other people. And so I actually polled about 5 people on the film, and universally they all said, yeah, you're being an absolute moron. Like, Dan's right. It's time to make the change. And so that happened a couple times, but that kind of creative tension can lead to great things. And so as long as you're willing to embrace it and hopefully keep the darker, more maniacal parts of making these things at bay, normally you feel good about the product when it comes out, and sort of the rest is up to the audience. And
is that your experience? Because I know early in your career you've worked with Dawn Porter, who we recently had on, and Matt Heineman. We've had, lessons, because they're greats, right? So the lessons you've learned, from them.
Yeah, I had basically the greatest education you could possibly have in documentaries by starting working for Marshall Curry, who made Street Fight. Which I was an assistant editor on, and then worked with him on Racing Dreams and If a Tree Falls and Point and Shoot. And then as soon as I left, he finally won his Oscar, because I was clearly dragging him down. And then I worked with Matt Heineman for a number of years, Liz Garbus, Dawn Porter. Yeah. And I think that, you think about how much people pay to go and get an education from the top universities in the world, and I got to get paid to sort of work with these masters at their craft, and learn all of these things and help them tell their stories. And I think that I got to look at all the raw footage, so I got to see how all these people asked questions, and then being able to take all of it and sort of apply it once I finally got into the director's seat was obviously a huge honor. And I think there's no right or wrong way to make documentaries. I think it's I think what I've always just felt is, make the kind of movies or series or whatever that you want to watch. And if you sort of stay true to that, then you'll probably make something that other folks like to watch.
Okay. Usually I would close by asking you what's next, but you know what? I'm not. I'm going to let you take that holiday, that vacation that you deserve. So forget about that. Go wherever you're going, a beach, the mountains, wherever. Enjoy yourself.
The beach.
Yes.
It's going to be nice. But no, I'm going to take a couple months and then start looking into the next thing at that point.
Well, it's been a joy having you on, and if we'd love to have you on again if you're up for it. And Matt Hamachek, just to remind our listeners, we talked with Matt Hamachek, the director of the docu-series The Dynasty, New England Patriots, episodes 1 to 10, available on Apple TV+. Do check it out. Thanks again, Matt. Thanks again for joining us on Factual America. A big shout out to everyone at Intersound Audio in York, England for their great studio and fine editing and production skills. A big thanks to Amy Ord, our podcast manager, who ensures we continue getting great guests onto the show and that everything otherwise runs smoothly. Finally, a big thanks to you, our listeners. Please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas, whether it is on YouTube, social media, or directly by email. And please also remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off. You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, which specializes in documentaries, television, and shorts about the U.S. for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is factualamerica.com.